Good morning, and welcome to the Ripon Church of Christ. We're so happy that you're with us this morning. If you want to be with us live, we do meet in the morning at 9:30 over here outside on the west side, and we would love to have you with us. You know, there are so many examples of amazing people who care for others so much that they had the courage to stand and help others during the time of Hitler and his Nazis during the evil Holocaust. One in particular is an amazing woman named Irina Sendler. See, when the Nazis invaded Poland, they rounded up all the Jews and they put them in these marked off sections of towns and cities, and they called them ghettos, or they called them Jewish residential quarters. See, the Germans created some 1,000 of these occupied territories, and the largest was Warsaw, there, the Polish capital. There's nearly 500,000 Jews that were confined there. Now, Sindler knew what was eventually going to happen to these Jews. She worked as a social worker. She also got the credentials to be a nurse, and she would go and she would sneak in supplies that were needed. That were much needed, food and water and medicine and other things like that. And she would go inside the ghetto there, and she would give these necessities to the poor, starving, suffering Jews. Now, there's a phenomenal statistic. She and her helpers saved 2,500 Jewish children from the ghetto. See, they would sedate them and they would hide these children under the burlap sacks and inside of toolboxes in the back of her truck bed. And then she would send them through a network of other brave heroes to these Christian orphanages where they were given new identities. It is stated that she kept the real names in jars that she would bury in her backyard. But she was eventually caught by the Nazis, and they broke both of her legs. And in my opinion, it's only by the grace of God that they did not kill her. The war ended. She worked to reunite the children back to their families, although that was nearly an impossible feat. See, she was a brave hero. She used courage and she influenced others to help, and together they saved many lives. Well, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, that's what Esther was like. She was such a woman. She was a woman of faith and great courage. She used those wonderful traits to save others. She used that great influence to make a difference in this world. In Esther 4:14, Mordecai says to her, "If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." See, God has called us to His kingdom for such a time as this. See, I do not know the purpose in your life. God does. I don't. But we can all agree with what He expects from each and every one of us is to be a good influence, especially for such a time as this, when there are so many bad influences out there in the world. Today we're going to look at the book of Esther, and we're going to see how Esther was a true hero of faith because she had that courage, and she used her faith and her courage to influence others and to save God's people from genocide. Well, first of all, let's look at a little bit of background of the book of Esther. You know, the book of Esther is the second of two books named after a woman. And what is different about the book of Esther than the other books of the Bible is God is not mentioned all throughout the 10 chapters. However, when you look and you read the book of Esther, you will notice there is God's presence there. His presence, His power, His providence, surely. And that He has planned. That He has made a plan that works in people's lives to save His people. And you may have noticed that the sub-theme throughout our summer series of the heroes of the faith is about God working in the lives of people to deliver His people. It's no different here in the book of Esther. See, Esther has four main characters with a main plot. And there are sub-characters with many subplots within. And we're just going to focus today on the main ones, and mostly Esther. Well, let's first begin in chapter 1 and look at a main character of chapter 1 of the story. Ahasuerus, the mess. Esther chapter 1, verse 1, 2 says, "Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa." Remember, in these Persian cities, there were Jews scattered all over from the exile from Babylonian captivity, and they remained in Persia. Many Jews went back to Israel, but they stayed. There's many who stayed there in Persia. Now, King Ahasuerus, or you may know him as King Xerxes, his Greek name. He was a mess, and that's why I say Ahasuerus the mess. He was sexually immoral and self-indulgent and selfish. He had self-pride, self-prideful. He's also a subpar military leader. See, he lost many battles. He was a worldly king. Most kings were like that. In chapter 1, 3 through 9, we see that he has a 6-month meeting. And it's going to discuss the war strategy against the Greeks. See, his father, Darius. Before Darius could act in revenge and go after the Greeks for their loss before, he died. And then King Xerxes takes over, and he picks up where his father left off, and he's going to go after the Greeks. And so they have a celebration also. They have a 7-day lavish party. And he is such a mess that he orders Queen Vashti to come in front of the people to show herself off. See, she was a beautiful woman, the Bible tells us. And I don't think he was just going to say, "Here's my beautiful wife, your queen." Because she refuses to do so, disobeys him. And this makes him furious. And basically he bans her from his presence. When you look at chapter 2, he is done with her. He remembers what she did. After he settles down, he's going to remember that. Now he's out to search for a new queen. Esther chapter 2, verse 2 through 4 says, "Then the king's attendants who served him said, 'Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, and to the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the woman, and let their cosmetics be given them. Then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti.' And the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly." See, Jewish historian writer Josephus wrote, it was narrowed down to about 400 virgins who prepared themselves for a year to go in front and to be chosen as the new queen. See, this is like a big beauty pageant. Hadassah, that was Esther's Jewish name. She was one of those virgins that was chosen. that was carried off to be presented as one night with the king. And King Ahasuerus promotes Haman. He's going to promote Haman the Agagite to be his right-hand man. In Esther chapter 3, verse 1 says, "And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him." So we get our second character of influence here. And we go to Mordecai. See, Mordecai was a faithful father figure. He was a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. He was from that exile, and he was Esther's cousin. But he raised her like his own daughter. See, she lost her parents at a very young age, and he took on that father figure. Chapter 2, verse 5 through 7. And Mordecai was a pious, he was a law-abiding Jew. And because he worked in the king's palace, he respected King Ahasuerus. And he uncovers an assassination plot against the king. Mordecai told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name, and when inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed both were hanged on a gallows. See, Mordecai was very protective of Esther, and he watched over her. He would make his way over to where she was in the palace, just to see if she was okay. And then he even changed her Jewish name of Hadassah to the Persian name Esther. But Mordecai and the Jews were in danger. See, Mordecai refused to bow to Haman when he wanted everybody to bow to him. He would only bow to God. Esther chapter 3, verse 2 and following, we read that there. And the Bible tells us that Haman became enraged. See, he wasn't going to touch Mordecai, but he surely plotted to kill him and to kill the Jews. And we're going to see that later how Mordecai was a big influence in helping Esther to save God's people. Now that's going to take us to our third character. And this is of evil influence. Haman, the plotting Jew hater. Yes, he hated Jews. And why did he? Well, he was an Agagite. Esther chapter 3, verse 1 and 10, and also chapter 8. See, from this time, we go back nearly 1,000 years in history. When the Israelite exodus from Egypt, they were attacked by the Amalekites. And these Amalekites were descendants of Esau, the one who sold his birthright. See, and this angered God. This God caused God to put a curse on the Amalekites that we read in Deuteronomy chapter 25. And it says that one day that they are going to be extinct. See, these evil, barbaric, child-sacrificing Amalekites are going to be no more. God's going to wipe them out. They're so evil, he's going to wipe everything out, even their cattle. We see this in 1 Samuel. 400 years later, their king, the Amalekite king Agag, was captured. And the prophet Samuel tells Saul to kill him, but Saul ends up sparing his life, and that caused him to lose his throne. 1 Samuel chapter 15. And Samuel does the job. And I'll spare the details, but he did kill him. No more King Agag. So Haman then will convince King Ahasuerus that the Jews were enemies. See, that they were a threat to his throne. So King Ahasuerus gives him his signet ring. Haman had free reign to stamp all the documents to cause genocide on the Jews. Chapter 3, 8 and following. You know, I could just see Haman smiling like in that cartoon around Christmas time, the Grinch who stole Christmas. You know, when the Grinch sat there and he got that big, evil, wicked smile. I could see Haman doing that. Thinking that I'm going to get them. I'm going to wipe those Jews out. Evil. Evil influence. And then we get to Esther. The courageous and the faithful influencer. See, Esther impressed the king so much that he chose her to be his queen. And you could say, yeah, she was beautiful. The Bible tells us that. And of course, that played a big part. But if you think about it, he had a choice of hundreds of beautiful women. So what was it about Esther? It was about her beautiful heart. See, she was not only beautiful on the outside, she was beautiful on the inside. She had a godly character and a godly heart. She carried herself like no other woman did. She had that charm. She had God so deeply instilled within her life, within her heart. And that caught his eye. Mostly, he wanted her. The Bible here at Esther states that she did not request anything from the king. You wonder what else was requested of the king from these other women. Only what Haggai advised. Esther chapter 2, verse 15 through 17 says, And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. You know, how do we find favor with others? Well, we be like Esther. We live godly lives. We have God instilled within us on our hearts. So we build that rapport with people. We're loving and kind to them. We influence them in that way. We were respectful and charming. Those types of people, aren't you drawn to them? I sure am. I hope I'm that way to you, to others. See, Mordecai had an inner distress, though, within him. A humiliation. That he wept out. He wept, he mourned. He tore his clothes at the decree for Haman to destroy the Jews. See, he was feeling responsible for his actions. He was embarrassed. He was humiliated for what he had done, how he responded to Haman. He felt like Haman took that action because of him. And also he was worried about his people, that they would be no more. See, I know I've done before, as in, if I just would have listened, or if I did not say that word, they never would have responded that way. We never would have gotten that argument. You been there? Sometimes that is true, but other times there's nothing that you could say or do, or not do, or not say. And people are just going to be that way. I feel this was Haman. I feel that Haman just had so much hatred for the Jews that eventually it was coming their way. And Mordecai tells Esther of Haman's plot. He tells her to go to the king in the inner court. See, approaching the king in the inner court could be the end of her life. Unless, of course, the king would stretch out his golden scepter. Esther chapter 4, verse 11 and 12. In verses 13 and 14, he tells Esther to have courage to go to him. Like what we just read, we're going to read it again. He says, Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. See, Mordecai uses his influence to his, I'm going to call his daughter, Esther, Queen Esther, to go to her husband, to go to King Ahasuerus to save her people. But Esther knew she may die. And she basically says, if she dies, she dies. See, it was worth it to her. And she goes to the king, and he stretches out the golden scepter, and she touches it. And he says to her, whatever she wants, that he will give to her. He will give her half his kingdom. See, Esther didn't want his kingdom. She wanted for God's people to be saved. She wanted to expose Haman. She wanted him to be punished for what he was going to do. And she asked for a banquet. She asked that he invite Haman to be there. And I could just see Haman in his conceited way, his puffed up way. And he gets to be there with the king and the queen at this private banquet. And for some reason, the first banquet, the timing wasn't right. They have a second banquet. And notice what she said. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king. Look at that respect. See, if it had to do with slavery, she didn't want to bother the king, but it had to do with her people, God's people being annihilated. And he asked, who was she talking about? Chapter 7, verse 5. She states this. A foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and the queen. Esther chapter 7, verse 6. And King Ahasuerus was furious, and he hanged Haman from the very gallows that Haman went and prepared for Mordecai. How ironic. See, this Esther, once a Jewish orphan girl, became queen of Persia. And her one night with the king, she impressed him so much, and she became that queen. See, she used her faith and her courage. She used the type of person she was, that wonderful heart she had. And she influenced King Ahasuerus to save God's people. You know, as we look at this, we see the different influences in these characters. How King Ahasuerus, he wasn't a good influence with how he was. He was worldly, but when you think about it, the love of a young woman, a young, brave, beautiful young woman in soul. His love for Esther caused his eyes to be open and to do what was right. And then Haman, that evil influence. One in whom was able to first lie and to sway and plot, and his influence got the king to make a decree to allow a genocide upon the Jews. See, there's many King Ahasuerus is out there, worldly people that may be so caught in sand that they just don't have any idea until they are influenced. There's many Hamans out there that are just looking to hurt others. They're lying and they're devising, plotting. We got to watch out for these. And then we get to the influence of Mordecai and Esther. The faith they had in God. The love they had for God and His people. That they used their influence to save His people. See, when we look at our lives, and we all have influence in our faith. We all have influence in our Christian walk. As we strive to emulate Christ, the question we all need to be asking ourselves is this. For such a time as this, facing these unprecedented times, times of uncertainty, times of chaos, times of destruction that we see going on in our cities, people beating other people up, all the violence and people being killed in our city streets. See, it can be easy to go along and just to be a bad influence. So we ask ourselves, how will I use my influence to spread goodness and kindness to others? How will I be an Irina Sendler, a Mordecai, or an Esther? See, how am I representing God in this world in which lawlessness and sin appear to be seen as peaceful and good? Am I going to be the one to throw stones of insults and hatred? Or am I going to be one to use words of encouragement and love and hope? Am I going to burn others down, or am I going to build them up? See, God has called each and every one of us in His kingdom to be these good influences in a world full of such bad influences. He's calling us to be wholesome. He's calling us to be righteous. And the lesson is yours today. Hopefully something was said today in this lesson about Esther, this amazing book. She was an amazing woman of faith, a hero of faith that you can take with you. I'm so glad you're with us today. I hope you continue to be with us. And I hope this rest of this week is a safe and a great week for you. We will see you next time. God bless and take care.